That says we were muted. You guys had us muted. All right, so we're live. Folks, we are live. We are taking questions. So feel free to submit questions. We had trouble getting started, and we thought we had turned everything back on, but obviously not. So that's great. Yes, if you guys want to look at the Q&A there, we'll watch for questions. Sorry, there was some WebEx confusion. WebEx decided this event had already been completed, and so it wouldn't do anything for us. Turn the tape measure. Thank you. All right. So you will see measurements in the books. I'm just going to start talking about measurements that I know about since we don't have any questions at the moment. You will see measurements for the field in the manual that say it's 70.5 inches from the end to the middle of the picture. That's because your field is slightly less than 12 feet. It's actually 11 foot 9. So 70.5 inches is actually the middle of the field. So if you just use the middle of the tiles to line up the pictures when you're doing them at home, that will work fine. That's how it's going to be, is they're in the middle. You got a question? The tower dimensions look different. So this is 24 inches wide, right? Or basically 24 inches wide, and it's centered on the second tile here. The height, obviously you got the 12 inches or so of the wall. The top of this is 48 inches and a fraction. And remember, almost everything in FTC where we have field elements says plus or minus an inch, right? The one thing that's tighter is, you'll see the specifications on this. It's a 5-inch ring with a 3-inch hole in the middle, plus or minus a quarter of an inch, right? There will be variation in production. I don't expect it to vary by more than 1/8 or so of an inch, but the rules say plus or minus a quarter. The robot needs to be designed to handle variations in that. I can't tell you how many times we had with the lander where people were saying, well, but the lander thing says it's supposed to be at this height. And we point them to the rule that says, yes, the landing ledge that you have to hook onto is that height, plus or minus an inch, just like it says in the manual. If we're within, like half an inch off, and they're like, yeah, whatever. So. On the tournament field, there will be real white tape. This is just masking tape because when we set things up and we managed to get transport here, we didn't have the official white gaffer's tape. You will have white gaffer's tape marking this off. Now, the way they've decided to do everything this year, the tape doesn't cross any tile boundaries. So you'll notice that the tape for the starting areas comes right up to, if you kick one of these guys off, comes right up to the end where the tiles start being graded. Right? This tape marker comes right up to the edge of where it starts being separated. And technically on this white tape, there will be a 2-inch gap around each of the joints where the tiles come together. Officially, the tape is broken up at each of these, so you easily can pick tiles up and put them back down. So yes, there will be white gaffer's tape across the field. No, it will not be continuous across the field. You can't follow it like a line because you will get to gaps. So hopefully that helps. So we said 48 inches tall is to the top of this, right? Again, the numbers in the manual. This is 48 inches to the top of the tower goal, plus or minus 1 inch, right? The opening here, if you look, if I get the tape measure, this is measured from the field side, not from the floor side. This is basically 33 inches to 38.5, right? So you've got about 5 1/4 inches. Now, I will point out that means if you take one of these rings and it's flat, it may go through. I will also point out that this material is very flexible. So the distance here will be plus or minus. I mean, this right here is going to be plus or minus an inch, right? You need to be on the high side of that. This is a fixed height. This is fixed because it's harder material. So when you're shooting for this top goal, you need to err on the side of going up. You want to be in the top 2 or 3 inches of it because this one may move. And of course, the goal right here is for your opponent. So you want to be very careful on what you do with that. The bottom goal starts at the 12 inches or so of the wall height and goes up to basically 20.5 to the top of the bottom goal. And again, that's the only one that you can place the rings into. The middle and the high you need to shoot into. And of course, The tip and tail targets, you need to shoot. And every time you shoot, you be behind the line. If you notice, the line is basically 12 inches off that, right? It's the middle of this tile. So it'll be 50 inches from the back wall, right? 58 and a half in the center of the line. Other points on this little wobble, the spike coming up out of it, it's the same plastic pole coming up out of that, the same PVC that we have here, and that's about 9.5 inches from the bottom, from the flat surface to the top. So if you're stacking these at 3/4 inch again, you can get 14 on there, but it would be a trick to get them to stay. If you could stack them really well, if you can make it balance, you could do something like that and stack a whole bunch on it. But since you can only carry 3 at a time, good luck keeping it balanced while you do. And remember, rings on there are worth 5. In teleop and in endgame, any ring shot in the top here is worth, that was a bad shot. I can do it from across the field. I can't do it from right there. Ring shot in the top are worth 6. And so it is actually more points to shoot them in the top than to stack them on the pivot. And then you can recycle them. Right? You can only put those on once. So if you want to put 2 or 3 on there when you put it out, that's fine. Just remember, at the end of endgame, if they're on there and going that way, nobody's shooting them in here making points. And these can be recycled continuously. So now somebody might say, well, gee, if I'm bad at shooting, maybe I'll take them all and power them on there at endgame. And even if I can't get it very far, I deprive the other alliance from having those. Right? In a multi-team game, you could do that. Obviously, on your single field, you only deprive yourself. And I did ask Lori during our break, on your, what do we call it, the remote field? Yeah, on the remote field, the game elements will be the same. You will still have 2 wobbles. You will still have 10 total rings. Now, obviously, you can't have more than 1 wobble touching your robot. You can't have more than 3 rings loaded on your robot. You'll have a variable number on the spot, and all the rest will be given to the human player. So if you don't put any and there's no rings there, your human player will start the game with 10 and will start throwing them out as soon as teleop moves. As in previous games, you're not going to be able to, the human player will not be able to throw things out until the start of teleop, right? You can't have this random stuff being thrown all over the field. So be aware that the human player is going to have to play nice and not be throwing things out early. So they're just reading Q&A right here. Other questions? And yeah, Lori, feel free to kind of turn yours on and comment. Okay, I put it fairly far out. We'll try that. Is that any better, guys? I mean, I can't hear it well enough without getting to a reverb echo. So, okay. So I can keep doing measurements of things. Again, the pictures here are, this is in the center of the second tile. That's in the center of the floor. Those are in the center of the floor, middle of the second tile. Right? They're all placed basically vertically centered. The line across is 6 3/8 inch off the floor, plus or minus half an inch or so, right? I mean, this is a little variable. If you're planning it so that you have to have it within a fraction of an inch, you're setting yourself up for failure because that's not what you're going to get when you get to competition fields. So sorry about the trouble getting the call restarted. Had a few challenges. Glad we got you all on now. Any other questions coming out? Nothing yet. Okay. What were some of the other questions we had during the other call? The height? Okay. Yeah, again, this is basically 24 inches wide, edge to edge. All right. And so if you take off, all right, I'll check that. These are 1.5 inches or so each. So you've got about 21 inches, 20 and a half inside the poles. And in the top goal, you've got 16 inches dead on. Right. So it's a smaller goal, vertically and horizontally.
That's why you get the big points.
Right. Well, that's where it's worth, a lot of points. These are obviously worth more, but you can only score them the once in autonomous and then one more time for endgame. Okay. So the length of these as poking up here is 5.5 inches. It's a little longer going into the metal, but basically it's a 5.5 inch vertical hole. Yeah. And of course, leaning forward like that, it's a little less than that. So you've got a very similar, since this is about 5.5 here, it's a very similar target range. So when you build your device for accelerating and launching rings, it needs to be able to get them to fly fairly flat. Right? You're going to need real consistency to be able to make points with that, especially if you're shooting here, because if you shoot low there, the human player can just get it again. Shoot low here, you're giving them all to your enemy. So now, having said that, if you're doing it on the remote field and you shoot for the top and you miss and hit the middle, right, on the remote field, that scores for you. So in the remote field, you may not care, right? Because on the remote field, there's only one tower, so you score all on the same tide. So this is your high, your middle, your low. So during the fall, when most of our games are going to be remote, you might just say, I don't care, shoot for it. If it drops a little, so what? And you use time to refine your mechanism. But just be aware of that. The Alliance can score both wobble goals, and even if there's only one team on the field for the Alliance, they can score it. So if you're doing a remote game, you can score both wobble goals outside. Lori already told me that. So you can score the 40 points.
They're saying autonomous. So am I?
Autonomous or endgame? Sorry.
In autonomous, yeah. If they okay. So in traditional, when there are two robots, both of the wobble goals have to be preloaded onto a robot.
Or touching.
At least touching. So that would be very difficult unless there's a lot of good coordination. Now, in the remote, the other one's just sitting there, and that makes it a little bit easier to deal with.
Or if your Alliance partner doesn't move, right? If they just sit there.
Well, that's where the coordination comes in. You have to know what your Alliance partner did, but you can't start touching two of them. You have to start touching
and you have to deliver the one and come back and get the other. You don't go hoarding two of them and driving them across the field.
Right, you can't control two at a time.
Got to control one at a time. So yes, even in autonomous, you could move both, and on remote fields, you will have the opportunity. So that same parking advantage, if you know where to put it, if you figured that out, you could park them both there and get the points for both. Yes.
And they do.
Now, again, on the remote field, since you can only have 3 rings loaded on your robot, you can only shoot 3 rings for the goals or for these. Obviously, if you have 3 rings on your robot and you have the ability, the biggest points will be the power shots. However, these are worth 12, right? So it's going to be similar. So we tried playing with the wobbles. We even tried tipping some over and kicking them back. So if the wobble gets tipped over, if you tip it over hard enough, it will stay. Right? If you get it all the way over, but if something kicks it again, it can sometimes even just kicking it to the side. It really wants to wobble but not fall down. Right? Weebles wobble; they don't fall down. So they are pretty stable. They do a pretty good job of staying upright. Obviously, if you have rings on it and you tip it, the rings are going to tend to hold it tipped. And as they said, if the rings aren't supported by the wobble, they don't count. So if you manage to put the rings on it and tip it over, none of them are going to count.
If they're touching the floor, which they will be.
Which they will be as soon as it tips over.
Yeah. I was checking that because it does specifically say that if it's tipped over and it's still somehow completely supported by the wobble goal, you would still get the points. But I think that's a case where it's partially tipped over and like maybe it's touching something and That's possible.
It really tends to stand up. So unless you tip it completely over, which does take some work, but unless you completely tip it over, yeah, you can still tip it back up, right? You can bump into it. I mean, you may have an arm to tip it back up, but you can right it. And again, once it's tipped over, it showed me kicking it, right? And you just kick it in general. You push it with something, it will try. If it's moving, it's going to try and stand up. Having said that, I did once kick it and it rolled around on the edge very nicely and stayed laid down the whole time. As luck would have it, since Murphy loves computers and robots, when you need it to stand up, it won't. But also, try not to tip it over.
Keep in mind that kicking it with your robot would be considered launching it, and that is a penalty.
Yeah, so push it a little, don't shove it.
Yeah.
Right. If you hit it hard and you make it roll away from you rapidly, that's a launch. Yeah. Don't do that. There's not a whole lot else here to measure. Again, the individual lines here for the start lines are right on the edge of each of those tiles, but not on the seam. Right, so they come right up to the seam. Using those seams as the guide point for these lines, each of these squares is just inside the seams. Right, so they're a little less than 24 inches across. But because they use that, it's very easy to keep them the same and be consistent, rather than some of the things we've done in past years where you had tape moving in various places and you have definitive edges. Here we have definitive edges on the tiles to use, so as long as you're using these tiles, it's not that hard. And for those who are going to do remote and don't have a field yet, you can buy a set of approximate tiles like these on Amazon for like $80 or so. So you can have a real field and a real floor. Especially if you're going to wind up in a real competition meet later, you want to be, as Lori said, as close as you can to what you're going to be competing in. As it'd be a real shame to get to the actual competition and say, "Oh yeah, my robot can't do that here," right? It'd be very disappointing. You show up at your league championship and nothing works right, and you went from having an awesome robot to you don't go to state. So, at least find a field you can borrow some time on. Right, there's some folks who have fields, so if you have trouble finding one, send me a note and we'll work on finding you somebody who can get you some field time. All right, what else we got? Okay, so our inauspicious start may have scared a bunch of people away.
Yeah, probably.
We'll give it a couple more minutes. Any last thoughts on the game, Lori? Other than I talk too much about strategy?
Stop it. Okay. You guys are going to come up with your own strategies, because that is what you're here for. That is your job. Your own design, your own strategies. But if anybody is anybody still out there?
Oh, you can look on the participant list and I'll show you how many people are there.
Okay. Does anybody have any game questions since I'm still here? Because if ever I am given the chance to give last thoughts, those last thoughts are going to be read the game manual, keep up with the game forum.
And by the way, folks, I'll point out that I've offered some ideas on strategy here. Just because I'm offering them doesn't mean they're any good, right? They're worth everything you paid for them. I've been known to work with, my team one year. We had some great ideas and we went and implemented things, and we went down completely the wrong road, and we wound up with a robot that was fairly useless because we had some great strategy. It just wasn't right for the game and didn't work. Right? So analyze your strategies, do some scoring, mock it up, figure out what's going to work.
Yeah.
This is a game that's all these things are going to fly. It's about physics. Find somebody, right? Look for mentors who understand physics, right? So driver practice will be good. Of course, first you have to have working robot to have driver practice. But yes, driver practice will be key. I will say if these things are going to fly a lot, you might want to talk to somebody who plays like Ultimate Frisbee or has studied the physics of it, right? Because you're throwing rings, right? Anybody who's ever thrown an Araby, it's the ring version of a Frisbee, right? Owned one for decades, lots of fun. there are things about how they fly that work well, and things about how you can throw them that will make them not fly well at all. Right? You're going to try and make wings fly. Not quite like making pigs fly, but similar. So pigs squeak a lot and do a lot of flailing. These won't squeal or flail. Yeah, you hit them hard enough, maybe they'll squeal. Well, yeah, the human players, they take your sacrificial pig, lamb, whatever, make them the human player. All right.
Anybody want to ask me where I got this cool first mask?
Where did you get that cool first mask, Lori?
First South Carolina. Look them up on Facebook.
All right, so if you go to the First South Carolina Facebook page, you can get a perfectly wonderful first mask like that for all your first events. We haven't yet that I know of. All right, any last questions, guys?
I want to know that too. So let's look. Do you have the?
I'm not logged in there correctly.
Okay, I am.
Lori's going to go work on that on her laptop for a second, so we'll find that out. The game manual was much later this year. Normally, it's out like promptly at noon, or sometimes even 5 minutes ahead. All right, it was like 30 minutes or 20 minutes after the reveal. All right, well, one's been out for months, right? And Game Manual 2 for both the in-person and remote are out there. The one-page summary of the game is out there. Look through the Game Manual Part 2, look through the scoring elements. Again, almost every measurement I've given you here is right there in the book. If you don't see that, you can also get, and certainly your mentors and coaches will have access to the field setup guide. The field construction and field setup guys also have a full set of measurements in them. So that's up for this year. There's a game archive. I don't see a game forum. Okay, so Lori's just looked. She doesn't think the forum's open currently. For this year's game, it should be up shortly. I didn't see this year's code on GitHub yet. As of today, you can start with last year's code because with version 5, it does understand the control hub, and so you can get started with that. I will tell you, if you didn't come to the control hub hardware class that I did at 9 o'clock, it may be worth watching if you haven't played with it. Control hub is awesome, and I'm doing an Android class at 4 o'clock, so 45 minutes. Other question? So you can't launch the wobble; you can only place it. So if you drop it down and it happens to move a couple inches out, fine. If it's more than 12 or 18 inches from the wall at the nearest point, you're likely to be accused of launching and not get points for it, and maybe get penalties on top of that. So it should be near, it should be placed, it should be done nicely. Lori cringes every time I drop it 12 inches because it does make a loud, I'm almost going to crack myself noise. Right?
On this floor, yeah.
So, but it's hard floors in most of the places.
Yeah.
So, you want to be nice to your wobble and not shatter it, because you don't want to have to buy more of them because they ain't cheap.
Yeah, but all that he said was correct, and you're correct that the game manual does not specify a distance.
But it might be a great question to put into the forum. Is there a guidance that we can give to the refs that says if it's more than 12 inches or something?
That's for the ref forum. Different forum. Hello, Robo Dragons. I hope to see some videos of your matches. I promise I won't ref them. I'll just look at them and applaud. That's all I'm allowed to do this year, if you're remote. I have to ask on the ref forum if I'm allowed to give my feedback unofficially. Okay, I was asked if teams can post their videos on, say, YouTube. Yes, they're allowed to do that. Are they allowed to ask me specifically for feedback. I have to ask on the referee forum if I'm allowed to do that. Things are different this year. So what I have to be careful about is that I have to make myself, if I'm making myself available to do that for any team, I need to make myself available to every team, which is fine as long as it's on YouTube. I can be. So if I would think that if as long as I communicate that to all the teams as a service that I provide, it's probably okay. But I'm going to ask for permission instead of for forgiveness this time, so I don't get my hands slapped.
Now, you can obviously ask some of your mentors and all who are not official referees what they think about things. They can give you some feedback, but it's unofficial feedback. No more?
All
All right.
Signing off.
Yeah, then I guess we're going to call it. Apologies for the rough kickoff on this one. I'm glad that you all were able to participate in this, questions answered. We will work on doing some additional practices on some of this for future events to try and make sure that it's not quite as rough. And we look forward to seeing you all throughout the season, at least on video, and hopefully in person in January and such for some wonderful league meets and league championships and state tournaments and all the way to Worlds. So thank you very much. Have
Stay
an awesome
safe, stay healthy, everybody.
All right, you guys want to mute us and cut video? And Janice, you can go close the event.